Have you ever been hungry enough to devour an entire galaxy? Let's talk about how to start a Tyranid army in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Tyranids and some ideas for getting a starting force of the Bogs off the ground and all ready to overrun the defences of the other races and render your foes little more than extra biomass for the hive mind. In the video we'll talk about why you might want to collect Tyranids, ways that you can go about planning an army, perhaps some of the first steps to get your scuttling horde of terrors into battle, a few ideas for expanding the army beyond that, and one idea for a strong army list that's doing well at the moment. Plenty to get our teeth and claws into today, so let's take a bounding leap straight into it. Tyranids are certainly one of the iconic races of 40k, and perhaps the most alien of all the alien races. The Tyranids just really don't communicate on any level. They're an all-consuming hive fleet of alien horrors from beyond the stars. No one knows how many of them are out there, and they are very much an existential threat to the entire galaxy. When a hive fleet arrives, it cuts a bloody swathe through the galaxy, insectoid horrors pouring from the sky or undermining the cities beneath the very earth, sweeping all resistance aside, usually in a vast war of attrition, and their multitude of organisms are incredibly adaptable, mutating and adapting to combat the best defences of the foe. Once resistance has been swept aside, the entire world is essentially devoured, stripped down of all its biomass, to create yet more organisms with which to ravage anew. If you want to play as the Bogs in StarCraft, Starship Troopers, or Alien, then you might be particularly drawn to the Tyranids. Model-wise, the Tyranid range really is quite a large one as far as Games Workshop goes. They've got all manner of Bogs, great and small, from great big burrowing trigons like this one, to swarms of drones to overwhelm the enemy, and great big winged horrors that fly through the sky. Despite having a large range, the Tyranids really haven't received all that many new ones though in recent years. I think a lot of Games Workshop's effort for the Tyranids have been put towards adapting their allied faction, the Genestealer cult, and it's meant that the Tyranids themselves haven't really received all that much attention for a while. Despite that though, I think quite a lot of their range really holds up quite well. A lot of the range is in plastic, and it can still look absolutely stunning swarming across the tabletop. Probably the biggest gripe are the things that are still in the Citadel Finecast resin, certain kits like the Pyrovore and Biovore. They can be pretty expensive on a per model basis, and perhaps not quite as nice kits to work with. Gameplay wise, the Tyranids can be fairly varied. They're perhaps best known for their mad rush into combat and swarming the enemy with things like Genestealers or Carnifexes, but they do really have quite a decent amount of ranged units as well, and a lot of their ranged units are actually some of their strongest things. I think Tyranids are one of the armies that have some of the most interesting combos they can do at the moment, with stacking things like stratagems, character buffs, synaptic link command abilities, and other stuff. They can really make some very scary critters indeed. They have the potential to do vast swarms of lesser minions, or a whole stampede of Nidzilla monsters if you like, so there are plenty of ways that you can take your own particular faction. Recently Tyranids have enjoyed quite a bit of attention from Games Workshop in terms of supplemental content. Their recent Leviathan supplement, Synaptic Links, and their recent Crusher Stampede formation all have added significant power to the army. It's left them as perhaps one of the stronger factions in 40k right now, though to get them there you do have to make good use of these new combos. Price-wise, I'd say that Tyranids are fairly middling price for 40k. You can make some armies that are fairly elite and therefore a little bit less costly, but they don't really have all that big an access to discount bundles, only having the one start collecting box that we'll discuss later. Overall though, they're certainly a fun and dynamic faction. They really feel like one of the alpha predators of 40k, with a never-ending stream of apex predators, perfectly attuned to overcome and kill those who defend the world that they choose as their prey. When you come to planning an army in 40k, you could think about making a draft army list with things like the 40k app, Warhapedia or Battlescribe. All of those can let you mess around with points values and see what you might want in a big force if you get there. And there's always the potential to try out lists and armies with things like Tabletop Simulator, the Steam game that allows you to proxy models in a virtual environment, or just literally proxy some models in an actual game and have a few models stand in for some NIDs. If you need a bit of advice and guidance, there's plenty of groups on social media. There's certainly some dedicated Tyranid groups on things like Facebook, subreddits, or Discord servers, and they can be decent places for newer players to ask a few basic questions and have a few people who actually collect the faction point them in the right way. There's a fair bit of content on YouTube as well. I've made a fair few videos myself on the Tyranids over the last few months, things like some tier lists and overviews of the faction, and there's a really good YouTuber called Tactical Tortoise. He makes quite a lot of dedicated Tyranids content, as I believe it's his main army. Could well be worth checking out, and I'll link his channel in the video description. In any case, after you've felt out the faction a little bit, you could think about planning out an initial 500-point combat patrol force to go into battle with. I'd say something like that is quite a good starting block for an army, get them up to a certain point, and then you can actually have some small games and experiments, and just have a very rough feel as to where you want to take the force after that. A few key decisions that you could make to start with are planning out a 2,000 point list as your initial idea to build towards. You could think about which high fleet you want to play. Leviathan certainly is quite strong right now, but I think particularly with Tyranids there's plenty of scope for just painting them in your own colour scheme and then just playing with the rules that you choose. You can build an army that's a bit more focused on ranged combat, destructive melee, or some sort of mix, and you could even think of a few big combos that you want to have in your eventual army. You could try and build a force around those Crusher Stampede rules, or maybe some fun combos like the Swarm Lord double moving some Gene Stealers for some massively quick threats, or some scary Hive Guard indirect firepower. I would always bear in mind though that rules in 40k will change over time. Points costs go up and down, and rules change when the codex comes out, so even if you are building it mainly for gameplay, I think it's important to be playing with models that you actually like and would use anyway, even if things got better or worse. In any case, if you are starting to get a small force together, you're first going to need the Tyranids rules, and then your first steps with some models. The first step rules-wise is most certainly Codex Tyranids. This is the 8th edition version of the book. It's still the current one for 9th edition. Tyranids are one of the factions at the moment that are still awaiting their 9th edition codex, and currently at time of recording, Games Workshop hasn't announced when that's going to be. I strongly suspect not within the next 6 months. If I had to make a very loose guess, maybe it might be in mid to late 2022, though that's absolutely unconfirmed at this point. I'd say the codex is all you need to start with. The current points in it will be outdated at the moment. I believe the current points could be found on the 40k app. I think you can still get them on the free version, or on something like Battlescribe or Warhammer. From there, there's a few other supplemental books that you can either take or leave. I probably wouldn't rush out and get everything straight away. I'd have a good few games with the standard codex rules first, but then probably the next one that you might want to look at picking up might be Warzone Octarius Rising Tide. That gives you some pretty powerful buffs to the High Fleet Leviathan if you are playing as them, and some really quite fun new synaptic link abilities that can allow your leader bugs to be just that bit more useful. I believe that book also has things like the adaptive physiology rules and some extra stratagems in it. I think that you can also find those in the Blood of Baal Psychic Awakening expansion. I'm not sure if that's sold by Games Workshop anymore, but seeing as that's kind of an outdated rulebook, it might be possible to find that second hand on the cheap. I did also mention that quite nice Crusher Stampede formation. That one's basically quite a restrictive army where you only take monsters and big things, but it does make them really, really strong. That one's currently only found in White Dwarf 2021, though I believe that pictures of it have been quite extensively posted on places like Reddit. So either that or looking at places like Warhammer might be one of the easiest ways to find that if you want to use those rules. I must admit, at the moment Games Workshop isn't making it particularly easy for Tyranid players to get their hands on the full army's rules. In any case, the Codex is the obvious starting point, and I'd think about getting that alongside your first miniatures. Maybe just a squad of basic troops of some sort might be a good idea for a first one. You could think about painting some test models for your colour scheme. But certainly early in the army, I'd consider something like the Start Collecting Tyranids bundle that Games Workshop sells. I believe it is the cheapest way to get the most points of Tyranids on the table right now. It's currently £60, 95 US dollars or 80 euros. It gives you a Broodlord HQ choice, a squad of 8 Gene Stealers, and a Trigon or Morlock. And I believe compared with Games Workshop selling these kits separately, it gives you around about 40% saving on the miniatures. As it goes for their bundles, that's really not too bad at all. For whether or not you really want it though, it kind of depends on whether or not you want that Trigon or Morlock. It's really quite a nice miniature I think, but I'd certainly say it isn't one of the strongest Tyranid models in game right now, but that admittedly might not always be the most important thing for you. Certainly Gene Stealers are one of Tyranid's quite nice hammer units, and are a really nice unit for receiving powerful buffs such as the Swarm Lord's double move, and the Broodlord is quite a nice all-round HQ choice, a decent amount of combat, some helpful psychic powers, and a nice synaptic link ability. I think I would strongly consider picking up one of these to get the force off the ground. Other things I'd think about fairly early on are things like some basic troops, maybe some Termagants or Tyranid warriors, and any other models that you found really inspirational or fun and have inspired you to collect the army. Maybe if you just like the idea of a whole bunch of Carnifexes wading into battle, I think there's no real reason not to get them fairly early, particularly if they're going to be models that you think look quite good and you're going to enjoy making and using. Through some combination of this, maybe the Start Collecting box, some basic troops, and a unit or two that you find fun, I'd try and aim for an army that's around about 500 points or 25 power level, and try and get a few games in at combat patrol level. Then when you're moving on to expand the army, I'd think about the various channels that you can get extra models from. Usually in 40k I'd advocate moving forward in small jumps rather than buying an entire 2000 point army all at once unless you're very experienced. Usually that has a much higher chance of buying a whole load of things that you just regret buying later. Tyranids have been around for a really long time. I'd certainly consider looking at any second-hand markets to see if you could get any bugs for cheap. If you search on eBay, you'll probably find a few people selling old Tyranid armies, and depending on where you live, it could well be worth keeping an eye on things like Facebook marketplace groups or subreddit selling threads. If you don't mind some pre-owned models, then that can be a really decent way to get a Tyranid army going. For new kits, I'd certainly be sure to look for any discount retailers in your given area. In the UK, there's plenty of third-party shops that give you decent discounts off Games Workshop's Warhammer miniatures. I've got a link to one Element Games down in the video description. That one is an affiliate link that gives a small amount of money back to the channel if you buy anything through it, but shops like Element and all the rest are great for just saving a little bit of money if you are getting new kits. Finally, I would always remember that rules will change where models will stay the same, so even if you are building up an army mainly for gaming purposes, I'd still try and tailor your choices to models that you actually like and are going to enjoy painting and playing with, even if potentially the rules move on a little bit and they're no longer the flavour of the month best thing. In any case, once you do have a core of Tyranids together, I might well be tempted to expand to a few more troops units, maybe things like Tyranid warriors, gene stealers or termagants. Currently I feel that the troops section of the Tyranid Codex is quite well balanced, with good uses for a lot of their units. I think a few small cheap squads of Tyranid warriors are quite hard to go wrong with these days, particularly being able to use their really nice synaptic link ability to give a +1 to hit to another Tyranid unit, while also being some semi-durable objective scoring. Gene Stealers and Termagants can really go in for some big damage combos. Gene Stealers are perhaps one of the best units to stack a whole load of buffs on, then hurtle across the table, and Termagants with a whole load of Devourers and shooting twice. It's really quite an easy combo to put a crazy 180 strength 4 shots down range. Otherwise, I'd be looking at other interesting damage dealer units, and for getting a big chunk of points into the army and also having a really useful model, I'd be quite tempted to pick up the Swarm Lord at least fairly early for the Tyranids. It's one of the best ratios in terms of money invested to the amount of points on the tabletop, and I'd say is nearly an auto-include in a lot of Tyranid lists right now. Being able to double move a unit is absolutely massive for getting your squads where they need to be, and it can provide a little bit of psychic support and melee as well. Otherwise, X-Crins put out some reasonable shooting for the points cost, and they do get you a fair amount on the points on the board for the money again. And certainly at the moment, if you want to be playing some sort of strong Tyranid list, Hiveguard are just scarily powerful right now. Big units with a little support can just hoover enemy units off the table, and are a massive problem to deal with as they should be able to hide safely out of line of sight behind a ruin. I do suspect that at some stage Hiveguard are going to get a bit of a points nerf. I'd be amazed if Games Workshop doesn't choose to turn them down a bit whenever they do a next balance pass. Otherwise, if you're looking to fill out further HQ slots, I think Broodlords or Neurothropes could be reasonable choices. The Broodlords are decent all-rounder, with a bit of melee and psychic and a decent synaptic link ability, and Neurothropes are one of the easiest ways to get Tyranid powers on the table, though I admit you do have to make those part of the Zoanthrope kit, which is a little bit unhelpful. There really are quite a lot of different ways that you can go with Tyranids right now though. Have your main damage dealers being big squads of Termagants or Gene Stealers, perhaps go heavy with Hiveguard, or try and build a monster themed list around the Crusher Stampede, which is certainly one of the more powerful ways to play them now. Finally, I thought we'd just wind up with one strong Tyranid army list. This one's a fairly balanced High Fleet Leviathan list, used by Tyler Hepler to take first at the Osatillo Onslaught Grand Tournament. I think this list looks really quite fun as a good way to showcase a lot of Tyranid units working in concert, rather than just spamming one thing. The list is led by the Swarm Lord with Paroxysm and Onslaught as his psychic powers, and then a Tyranid Prime with a few of the Leviathan goodies. He can redeploy units and get one unit to reroll all hits, farm command points, and has a very strong synaptic link ability with which to soup up the Gene Stealers. Talking of which, there's 2 units of 16 of those, 4 of them each taking Lassive Morse. Good units to soup up with buffs and have the Swarm Lord zoom them over to the enemy army, hopefully cutting down a lot of their forces and then being objective secured. A massive unit of Termagants with Devourers, 90 shots coming out of them and a great place to focus stratagems and buffs. A cheap unit of fast Hormagaunts for some objectives. 5 Tyranid Warriors, including 2 Lash Whips and Bone Swords. They take Adrenal Glands and the Bioweapon Bond synaptic link to give another unit +1 to hit. A big unit of the Indirect Fire Hiveguard with Impaler Cannons and Enhanced Resistance. Potentially all that nasty indirect firepower could be firing twice with the Stratagem. A Psychic Maliceptor with Catalyst and Focal Essence. Speed Venomthropes for some -1 to hit. And a few Forge World Sky Slasher Swarms, basically faster, more mobile rippers. Overall, there's just an absolute ton of interesting threats there, and I feel like this will be a really fun Tyranid army to play. I wouldn't focus too much on the Allied Patrol of Genestealer cult. Their rules are going to be changing in the new codex that comes out this week at time of recording. So anyway, I hope some of that's been interesting or inspiring for collecting a Tyranid army, and by all means, if there are any seasoned Tyranid generals out there, please let us know any tips or tricks for collecting the faction down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to check out the other videos on Auspex tactics. I have made plenty of Tyranid stuff, including things like a unit tier ranking and a faction over for their game rules in 9th edition, both of which are linked down in the video description. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to quickly mention the Auspex Tactics Patreon page, which is how I can afford to make quite so many videos quite so regularly. If you're interested in checking it out, the link's down in the video description. I do try and give channel patrons some decent rewards, seeing certain new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways, with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds interesting to you, or you'd just like to help support, feel free to check out the link in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.